still should look into this, because it's been affecting us all. So I don't know who wants to start, Joakim or Linda. I think it's you, Linda. Your scheduled first, at least. Are you ready?
Yeah, sure.
And we'll do this very low-shouldered. If you have questions, comments, you just raise your hands and we'll take it from there. Is that all right? Please,
yes, of course. So I was just asked to do a brief summary of what the report was and what we claimed was needed. I got the question to do this report last winter, and we started working as a very small office in January of 2021. I was the chair, and I had 2 secretaries joining me, and we presented the report the 30th of September, a couple of weeks ago. And we since then actually several things has happened that has already been consequences of our proposals. 2 new inquiries have been launched, for example, and there was also a big budget proposal from the Swedish government of 745 millions to be prepared for the restarting initiatives that we propose in the inquiry. But what we did was we were supposed to look at the consequences of the pandemic in the whole of the arts and cultural life in Sweden, from both a national and regional and local level, and in all genres. So we looked at literature, we looked at the arts and performing arts and all of it. And we decided to immediately start working through dialogue to do hundreds of interviews, actually, with different presenters and organizations and unions and artists from different parts of the sector from all around Sweden. And we proposed measures and investment that we think will create better conditions for the restart, but also for the recovery and further development of the arts and cultural sector after the pandemic. And it's difficult, of course, to use that word after, since it's still going on, and it's still we still don't know what's ahead of us. But what we did in the report was that we choose also early on not to look at what's needed from sector to sector, because we had such limited time and resources to do this, but instead we looked at it from a cultural policy perspective. So we looked at the whole sector from the 3 overall national cultural policy objectives in Sweden. The first one is called the independence objective, but we also looked at the participation objective and the societal objective. I mean, a big part of our report is to try to describe the situation both for institutions and organizations, as well as for individual artists, and to report on the consequences of the restrictions, especially on the public gatherings and events, and to describe how profound the crisis is for artists and activities that rely on audiences. And in our view, we mean that publicly funded measures will be needed for at least a couple of years after the pandemic to secure the survival of arts and cultural infrastructure and the development of cultural life. And we also put a long-term perspective on these issues. We address that there has been an erosion of public support for many years, And we describe how many arts and organizations in the sector have small or non-existent financial margins. And this is particularly true of the independent arts and cultural sector. And when the restrictions were introduced all over, acute pressure was placed on organizations dependent on revenues. And we mean that it can't only be short-term support for the future. We also propose that in addition to the increased public support, that we need broadening of funding also, as you are doing in the other Nordic countries more than us. But let me just look for something. I prepared all my notes, but it's gone now. So I'll read from Swedish and try to vad heter det? Translate immediately. We did 40 different proposals, and we were covering 9 areas in our proposals, and they are on. It's a big need. We claim that 3.9 billion Swedish kronor is needed if you're really looking at this seriously, and we are proposing a lot of support for the survival and the restart and recovery, but also for a long-term development. So we propose permanent support of a couple of 100 millions from 2024 and onwards, especially for the freelancing sector and for the independent sector. We also look at the international support that was halted, and that we need to push that again. We look at the trygghetssystemen. So how did I translate that? Someone help me. Social security systems. And we have a lot of sayings. I mean, today we're going to discuss what we learned. So we're looking a lot at the digitalization, but also that a lot of support is needed onward, not the least to pay the artist correctly when it comes to copyrights and etc. We also claim that there is big needs for the cultural and creative industry sector, and that the policy and politics today is not adapted for the needs of that sector. We're also addressing the need for arts and music in arts schools, but also in the regular school from very low age and onwards. Also to broadening the participation, both professionally and as audiences in the cultural life. And we are also suggesting a couple of more bigger moves. We were talking before the formal start of this seminar about the kultursamverkansmodellen, about how the different levels of government are collaborating on the cultural policies in Sweden, but some parts of that system needs to adjust. And we also address that the film policies in Sweden really needs acutely an update and a way forward. Learning, as John Paul was talking about before, from other sectors and readapting to what has happened the last 20 years, and finds new ways of getting better and stronger. So I think I'll end there, and we can discuss instead. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just leave the word over to Joakim. Are you ready?
Yes, thank you. I'm going to present a report that was written by Kulturen Norden, which is an organization that sits within the Agency for Cultural Policy Analysis in Sweden, but it's an assignment that we have from the Nordic Council of Ministers to work with cultural policy analysis on a Nordic level, the Nordic region. And this work has been done by researchers from Norway, from Telemark in Norway, and the head author his name is Ola K. Berge. So if you have further inquiries about this report, you can contact him. I think I will share some slides because just like Linda's investigation, this was written in Swedish or in Norwegian, and I've translated some slides. It's easier for me that way. So let's see if I can share my screen with you. Can you see something now? Yeah.
Yes.
This report had 4 main objectives, and it was organized in 4 work packages. The first question was to address the effects of the pandemic on the cultural sector. The second issue was to assess or describe the support packages, the national measures to support the cultural sector in each country. And the third issue was to try to sum up the effectiveness of these measures or support packages. And then we asked these researchers also to try to look ahead for some long-term effects of the pandemic and measures. And just as the report that Linda talked about, this work was done during the pandemic. We're still in it. The main part of data collection was made during last year, and the report was published in April, but it was finished already in March. So of course, regarding long-term effects, that's a very hard question to address. And you see the report here, both the PDF and the web publication. And I put some links also to the seminar where we presented the report and a link to the report itself. So just going through these, the results from these work packages, the effects of the pandemic, of course, on the cultural sector, regards very strongly to the social restrictions that different governments put in place to reduce the spread of the virus. And these restrictions varied over time, and I did this presentation in a Nordic-Baltic setting a while back, so you will see the Baltic countries included here, but one common like indicator of the level of restrictions is this Oxford index, and just to show that it varied over time and that this report was written mainly during the end of the year 2020, but the empirics, the data collection ended between the years 2020 and 2021, and then came the second wave and so on. So there's a crisis bias to the results of this report that you might keep in mind when reading it and looking at my presentation, of course. So the level of restrictions varied over time, and they varied within the Nordic countries as well. They varied according to this index in attitude during this time period as well. And according to this measurement, Norway seems to have had the strictest restrictions, and we know that lockdown was enforced in some countries and not in others. The same goes for the Baltic countries, which had on average a bit higher level of restrictions. And as of today, many countries are opening up, and in Sweden and elsewhere you can attend cultural events with big audiences now. This is the main kind of background to the effects of the cultural sector then. And when assessing the effects of the pandemic, all countries report that the cultural sector is particularly affected by the pandemic, large loss of income. This sector is among the very top of the hardest hit sectors in all countries, not the hardest hit sector when measuring employment and revenue, but among the hardest hit sectors in all countries. Of course, a few players or actors conducting digital distribution and so on actually experienced economic upswing, but they are very few. And when we look at bankruptcies, that we have not seen a very great increase in bankruptcies in the Nordic countries. And there's a section in the report about bankruptcies might not being a very good indicator within the cultural sector. When looking at employment, all countries had a decline in employment in the cultural sector. The situation improved in the autumn, but we know that it worsened again after that. There's, regarding these numbers, there's a bit uncertainty about the comparison of the sectors here, but according to this this figure, Sweden was the hardest hit in the quarters compared in this slide. Also, different subsectors are reported to be affected differently. Music and performing arts are reported to be the hardest hit in many countries, mainly due to the need for big audiences to gather, of course. There's also differences related to whether cultural workers are self-employed or employed in institutions, of course. And there have been a lot of debate about that. And in general, self-employed artists and cultural workers have been harder hit. Okay, so the national measures in the Nordic countries. During the time that this report was written, the support packages were summed up for the different countries. And all countries have had extensive support measures implemented, and they have included, of course, different political sectors like labor market support packages, enterprise support packages, and cultural policy packages. And they, in all the countries, they vary in the way they sort of entangle these support packages in the entanglement of the support packages. But when writing this report and summing up the support packages that had been activated at that time, this table kind of sum up the situation in the Nordic countries at that time. And in this comparison, Finland and Iceland have relatively low support packages compared to the other countries. But as I mentioned, which is especially significant in Finland, the support packages from different policy sectors kind of entangle and they are hard to separate. So that might be an explanation. Denmark had the largest allocated support packages at this time. Norway also high support packages, and Sweden somewhere in between.
Very cute formulated with Sweden there. Sweden is somewhere in between. Beautiful.
Great. We like to be to think of ourselves in between. So the effects of the national measures then. Most sources report that the support packages have been necessary and effective for those to whom they have reached out. It seems that the general measures have had the best effect for performing artists and musicians, and more specified or directed measures, better effect for institutions. But these support packages have at this time were also reported not always to fully meet those in need, and especially self-employed artists were reported not receiving the support needed. And in some countries also at this time, much of the aid granted had not been used, and that was especially the case in Denmark, where there was still at this time a large part of these allocated budgets not claimed by cultural workers. So what about the long-term effect? And this was the kind of also the hard part, and maybe affected by crisis bias at the time, but the authors were kind of conservative though in describing long-term effects, and they said that both cultural production and consumption and cultural policy will probably change in the long term, but they assessed that these changes would be of a limited scope. Also that cultural production could involve new combinations of analog and digital distribution, and that there would take time before cultural production based on travel and international cooperation would be restored. So they kind of saw nationalization of cultural production could be for quite some time the situation. The general cultural consumption and demand for cultural production should remain and reestablish itself after the pandemic, and also in the report there is quite significant description about the increase of digital cultural offerings, which might affect bookstores, cinemas, and so on. Yeah, this is pretty much the content of the report, and I added a link there, and you can also find the report and read it on the web. But I think I'll stop there, and I'll stop sharing this. Yeah.
Thank you, Joakim, and thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Are there any questions now immediately? If not,
Yes.
I got some questions.
Yes,
Yes,
I have a question. Joakim, in your report, and that's where I've really paid attention, it states that important parts of the cultural sector are governed by a non-economic drive. And that is that you can see that artists often prefer to work with their art rather than earn money. And you in the report is stated that fact is seen as a stabilizing factor and a resistance in the situation of crisis. I would like you to elaborate on that. I really think that's interesting. I mean, the poor artists just working because they need to work. That is the stabilizing factor. Maybe I'm misunderstanding it.
I will try to say something about that. Well, I mean, I don't know the word, the non ideal sector, we call it in Sweden. The sector that's not, it's neither public sector or private sector. It's driven by
non-profit.
Non-profit, yeah, of course, the non-profit sector is a significant part of the cultural sector. I think what the authors mean by the statement that you read is that since a lot of people might have two jobs, one job earning the food on the table and paying rent, and then one job maybe in the cultural sector, which is more driven by your interests or your personal preferences. Perhaps this is an indicator that a lot of cultural workers have more incentives beyond mere economic economic incentives in what they do. So I think maybe that's what the authors meant about the resilience of the cultural sector, that I think that's what's intended there.
Go ahead, Jean-Paul.
Yeah, I was thinking when we have these discussions, I sometimes feel that there is two groups of creators. One group that is working full-time, and this is considered a real job, and then we have other people driven by other reasons. And I think those two groups have in some ways not so much in common. And I end up in meetings and things together with the other group, and I don't mind that. I think it's good, but it's not exactly my situation. And so I'm thinking that, for instance, like 5 years ago or something like that, I had a situation where I didn't have a single job for a year. And that is just the nature of my business. And I'm always prepared for that. I've money saved, and I have a royalty income that will come anyway. And so this was a hard year, but not harder than other years for me. And that's largely because of royalties. They come anyway. That was just a comment on what you just said here, Jacob. So I think for me, it's two things. One thing is that it's very different if you're a full-time composer or not. And another thing is that compared with other cultural fields, musicians or composers are more protected because of the royalty situation. I don't know if this sheds any light on this, but that was just two thoughts I had. Does it make sense?
I can just comment on that. I mean, what's been so clear for many that are not in the business themselves but are working on the political side is what you're describing, basically, and also that many in the field are combining extremely commercial work with non-profit sometimes, and then also from time to time being employed maybe for a shorter period, like as a musician at an institution or something like that, with official funding. So it's that way of being a combining body yourself or organization that has shed light on also that the social security systems doesn't always work for that kind of work life as it should, and also, I mean, what is important for the future is, of course, the copyright and the royalties, because as we know, not everyone are paid correctly in those terms either. And it also, I mean, this situation made it so much harder for the less established artists, or the just newly examined musicians and artists who the last 3 years walked into nothing with their loans, studielån, etc. And what we also trying to address is that independently, if you are an established artist or not, there is a risk that many of the employments onward are occupied, so to say, that the festivals and the production possibilities are less perhaps than they used to be, since so much is piled up. I mean, so many investments are done in productions in all parts of the field already, that and the festivals are booked and the programs are set and so on. So that's what we're trying to describe too, that the situation isn't over because that the restrictions are gone, because it might be harder to get jobs for a way for the future. And also that since it's been so hard economic consequences also on organizers and presenters, there might be less risk-taking economically and artistically for who you present or who you hire or who you ask to compose for you. So we also have proposals in our inquiry of supporting especially actually music presenters to be able to, on the commercial side, to be able to take higher risks and keep the spectrum wide. So good points.
It's a big difference between composers and performing artists.
Yes.
Yeah, composers weren't really affected by the...
Not that hard.
No.
A little bit, but not that hard.
No.
My impression at least. Sorry, Linda.
Sure, huge difference.
Lone.
I just wanted to add something from Denmark. The umbrella organization with the Danish artist organizations representing 28 different Danish artist organizations. They are working on a report and they think they will launch it in the beginning of 22. And I spoke to one of the persons behind it or politically behind it, Sara Indrio, from the Artistforbundet. And she says that they were trying to collect evidence about how many udgivelser, you see, CD and music releases there have been, and that has been increasing during the pandemic. And that's also what you're saying, Linda and Jean-Paul, that there's a big difference between being a composer and being a performing artist. But she says that in her view, there has been a lot more releases. And then Finland, Kaisa, who is working with Music Finland, says that she has been lobbying very, very hard to try to get the Finnish government to start an investigation like the one you have been head of, Linda. And she hasn't succeeded yet. But then I would like to ask a generic question. what do you think an evaluation like this can be used for? What kind of tool is it? How can we take it further? What is the value of it?
Yeah, I mean, we addressed, I mean, it was the government who asked us to do it. So most of the proposals we address back to the government. This is what you can do from the state point of view. This is how you can look at the sector and learn from the sector and listen to the sector. And this work has been parallel with the incredibly increased dialogue, both with the Ministry of Culture and the the governmental bodies as Kulturrådet or Konstnärsnämnden. They have also been in way, and Filminstitutet, way closer touch with the industry and the artists and the presenters than ever before, I think. And I hope that will continue, because I think that one of the gifts with this is the dialogue and the learning, and the learning, as John Paul pointed out, both between genres and sectors, actually, where also competitors has come together in a way that they never have before. Like, for example, the commercial theaters of Sweden joined hands for the first time and started, you know, formulating their needs and their business model and what they, you know, what they need, their infrastructure and so on. And the visual arts industry that is extremely shattered, with individuals mostly working by themselves, came together in new aspects and so on. So that was something that happened not because of this report, but because of the situation and the needs it created. And but what we did was that we had a very close discussion with politicians, both in the parliament, with all the parties there during this work, to update them on the situation we saw, also because it was an urgent situation. And we updated on the civil servant level, the ministry during our work also, so that they would be able to bring proposals to the table already in the budget of 2022, because we can't wait much longer for that. And they listened. I mean, we don't know yet what the decision will be in the parliament, but it's a good step that it's already included as much as it is in the budget proposal for 2022. So that's a very concrete effect. But what happens also, I mean, the last few weeks I've been invited to do presentations like this, and also live presentations in different parts of the sector, and what many describe is that they feel that they are described, that their working conditions are described for the first time. We also tried to address the digitalization, the globalization, the changes that has been going on that are huge for the whole sector, but has not really been, you know, intervened in the cultural policies yet, but has to be. So I think that's a big take onward for the policymakers. And I also hope that it can be a toolbox to use in smaller areas. I mean, in a city or in a region, between politicians and art institutions, in their dialogue of what's needed for the future. And we also address, you know, how different parts of society can come together and strengthen the cultural sector. A lot has happened because of the digitalization, not only in the arts, but also in our way of living and living together, or not living together, I was about to say. I mean, like the course of the cities are changing, the gentrification are changing. I mean, the big institution, the big arts institutions might be more important than ever for bringing people together, also physically. Maybe more important than ever before, and you need to find, you know, common spaces for people when you build and plan cities and think of architecture or whatever. So I mean, in many of the discussions we've had also with regions and cities, for example, they have put key decision makers also from the urban planning side or the business politics side, or not only the cultural politics, to come together and ask themselves, like, how do we have to take responsibility for the arts to come back and strengthen them for the future. So we were hoping that we can provide a description that is current and accurate, and arguments.
Thank you. Lone? In Norway, we saw the same thing. We sort of like discovered the Achilles heel of the cultural sector, that they don't talk together. So they had to. I mean, the union stepped up and the organization stepped up, and everybody was usually just, or maybe still will go back to it, I don't know, but working from their own area in silos, and also just talking their own case. And we saw plenty of them just the rise up. And it was beautiful to watch. And it was also like, I think also the Ministry of Culture also learned what the culture industry actually is, because they didn't quite know. And then I see, of course, you can blame the Ministry of Culture and say that you should know what we are doing. But still, I think it also goes back to the cultural sector, that we have to be better at communicating on what we're actually doing. Because we sort of ended up with, we need support because of arts for art's sake, which is of course legitimate in a way, but it's also a business that very many people are dependent on. And what we didn't grasp around, as I see it, or working for Music Norway, is artists touring abroad or having a lot of gigs abroad. They didn't get any support nationally. But then we had support systems for concert promoters, let's say Live Nation, that Post Malone canceled his concert. They got 10 million support in Norwegian kroner. And those money went then abroad. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that money should not go abroad, but it was like sort of like I don't know, it was just weird to be a witness of this sort of argumentations. But we didn't get that far, and now it's sort of like opened up again. And everything is back to normal. And another thing I see is that some friends of mine working within the cultural sector, the support ends until the end of 21, right? So they don't want to get that much work because they still want to have that support during all the year. And that's a bit disappointing. And what else what sort of reflection did I do? No, I can't remember. But there were heaps. But what we also see now is that my father, for example, he's a touring artist that tours a lot. And he's also famous. And he has now started touring again. But what his target group, they're, let's say, 40, 50 and upwards. They're not back into the normal way of using culture again. They're still reluctant. They're still sort of like sitting on the fence, as we say. So I think this is going to last for maybe at least until next summer or something.
And maybe longer than that. I mean,
maybe longer than that also.
Maybe some habits are changed for some people.
Yeah, and I also hope so. In a way, it would be very wrong for me to say that I miss the lockdown, but I enjoyed sometimes having longer to dwell upon a decision instead of just take. Now it's just. I flew round trip Bergen the other day and took taxi both ways just to have one meeting and then go back again, and it felt like I was stuck in 2019 again or 18. Yeah.
Lone, you mentioned this report that was in the works right now that would be launched in 2022. What was the name of that organization that's supposed to do that? In Danish, I mean.
Dansk Kunstnerråd.
Ah.
Yeah.
Konstnärråd, inte konstråd, ja? Mm.
Yeah, Dansk Kunstnerråd.
Thank you.
And I would also like you to introduce you to our guys that's working with numbers. We also use Ola K. Berge doing some stuff. It would be nice to look at the different results from this service.
Yeah.
So a question to you, Linda. How much contact did you have with the other Nordic restart investigations? Did you have a lot of dialogue, or?
No, not a lot, but we had conversations, especially with Denmark and Norway. But we worked in very different ways, actually. I mean, because we were an independent inquiry, and Denmark had a Genstart team that was working within the ministry and had like a committee. I mean, we had 11. Thank you, Lone, for the link. We had sakkunniga in a kind of commission that read our report during our work and commented on it. But they had a team that gave a couple of suggestions on like 5 to 10 pages or something, and 50 million Danish kroners that was implemented directly. And the Norwegians were working through Kulturrådet in Norway. So I mean, it was
not symmetric.
No, exactly. Even though I think the perspectives were similar. We actually I haven't had the time to reconnect after the report. I sent it out, but I haven't discussed the results with them. I should do that.
Yeah.
And I think it's also an important take from now on. I think, I mean, I have quit now. I'm a freelancer myself, a combinator, and I think it's important to follow up also politically. What happens next? How is it going? To reconnect from the art sector and to keep the ministry and the other bodies updated on how it goes, because it looks very different between different age groups, as you said, of audiences, Einer, but also in different sectors of the arts, where I mean, I've spoken extensively with the performing arts, the theaters, for example, and the museums, and they are, if you generalize, still struggling. And many from the music presenter side that address younger audiences say that they are back where they were in 2019, but it differs. And the cinemas has also gone quite well, but they better than expected maybe, but they claim it's because of James Bond. And so I mean, it's important to keep the heat up, I think, to keep learning.
Yeah. Yeah, because as you mentioned, the restart investigations were not symmetrical in the Nordic countries.
No.
But and also when discussing restrictions and so on, there have been dissimilarities between the Nordic countries, but to some extent, I mean, at least from an outside perspective, the launching of political action during the pandemic to support the cultural sector, it seems to be almost synchronized in several Nordic countries, not least the restart investigations, which although they were organized differently, I mean, they have the quite similar aims.
Absolutely.
But both support packages and I heard a person referring to the Nordic press conferences almost being day by day after each other, launching different support actions by the cultural ministers and so on. So there's an interesting line there. How much real dialogue were there, and how much copying or yeah, it's interesting how the learning and the dialogue within the Nordic region and also the differences, how that played out during the pandemic and how it will play out in the future. So yeah, that will be interesting to follow.
And we should also be gentle towards the artists, because I also feel when we now ask questions, they are also like, oh, why should I ask even more? Like,
yes. Yes.
We're sick and tired of this now. Like now we all have like Excel sheets where I have to call the ones I know best and then SMS them and then like really like poke them to get them to answer.
Yeah, of course.
Lone?
I have two comments, and one is that I'm also, besides working with the Danish Film and Media composers, I'm also a freelance producer in dance and theater, and there has been cases during the Corona help where it has really not worked. And the help that we were supposed to get, it has not worked. I mean, I did an application and I had to, for support for an event, and I had to call them 3 times, and they gave me the money the same day as the event was going to happen. So it was just like, luckily I had other money, but if I didn't have that, then I could not have used the support. And that is, and I think generally speaking, it as an artist, it feels very disrespectful to be forced to apply into a system where there are people sitting who doesn't know anything and are not trained to do this work, but it all happens so quickly. So of course I understand that. But then, Linda, you said the follow-up, and I'm interested in hearing or trying to map how can we as organizations help in that. And you said 3 words that I really think is important. That is look, learn, and listen. So how can we help to look, learn, and listen so we can get further from this crisis we have been in, that we are in?
No, but I think initiate discussions and measures where it's most needed. I think sometimes there is I think what happened in a good way is actually that the power people were coming out as simple human beings in this situation. That is, it's possible to talk to them and it's possible to teach them things. that they don't understand, and I or need to learn more about. As you said, if you had the feeling that there were civil servants handling your application and they didn't know, maybe they did know, but they just didn't have the time to get back to you in time. And also where we started, where are the experiences that should be shared from the music world to the film industry, or the other way around, etc., etc. I think we should take direct moves. I mean, of course, that requires time, and so it's a lot to ask from the artists, but I think that's a big point for the organizations, and also for the organizations like the ones you represent, to take some time and look at the proposals that are on the table and review them and comment on them. Officially or back to the persons that asked for it. Now, I don't know the word in English for that, but it's just been decided that Från kris till kraft is going on a remissrunda, as it's called. So it's going to be sent out to all the municipal bodies and organizations and regions and so on, so that they can come back and say, we agree on this, but we do not agree on this, or if you put this into action, you need to clarify, the circumstances, this and that, etc. So that's a very formal, perhaps boring and time consuming, but still a formal way of keeping it up and influencing the decision makers. But I think speak up. I think it's the decision makers' job to keep learning and listening.
Wow, I agree.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for diving into this together with us. And I think we're ready to wrap up.
Yeah.
And god bedring, som vi sier på norsk, Linda.
Yeah.
And take care of yourself.
You too.
And you never know, maybe we see each other in real life at some point. We're going to do more of these sessions and keep you orientated during the year, to try to we have Nordic Film Music Days in February in Berlin, but we want to do this during the year to put it on what can I say, different topics. Have a nice day and take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.